So today we have Julia Yarbough with us, and we're so excited to hear more from her just about what she learned as a caregiver. And I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself and just jump right in. My name's Kelsey Halverson, and this is being put on by Passages Caregiver Resource Center. So we'll go over a little bit more of who Passages is and what services are available. For those of you who don't know, we'll go over that at the end. But we want to give all of our time just to Julia today. And so welcome, Julia. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Good afternoon, Kelsey. Thank you so much for that introduction, and welcome to everybody who's joining us in this virtual world. We appreciate it. I know it's a little different, all of us connecting online, so thank you, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Again, I'm Julia Yarbough, your host for this Accidental Caregiver event, and thank you for Passages for hosting this. We know you're busy, your time is tight, so I'm just going to dive right in and get started. And hopefully by the end of today's presentation, you'll have some practical tools and information and maybe even a bit of inspiration that can help you navigate the caregiving journey. So I'll give you a little bit of background about myself, my mother, my caregiving journey, and what I call the 3 Ps. We'll talk a little bit about that and some actionable steps that you have for caregiving. And then if there's any questions at the end of the program, we will do that as well. So a little bit of background about me. Who am I? I'm Julia Yarbough. That's me there, little kid covering up my face.
And Julia, your screen isn't popping up, I don't think. So
it's not showing?
Yeah, I don't think we see it.
Uh-oh. Okay, what are you seeing?
We see you.
Okay, let's see. All right, let's see here. New share. Let me try it this way. Okay, are you seeing it now? Is that a yes? I see some heads.
Yes, I think we got it.
All right, so I'll go back a little bit. So that's my little introduction. And many of you know me. I'm Julia Yarbough, a veteran broadcast journalist and news anchor with more than 25 years experience. I have covered news in Pensacola, Florida, Louisville, Kentucky, Miami, Florida, Los Angeles, and most recently here in Chico, California, where many of you joining us today are from the Northern California area. But my other professional position throughout these years has been a caregiver to my aging and health declining mother, Miss Nellie Pearl. And that's really why I'm here today, because that experience prompted me to want to learn more about family caregiving and how I could help other people after the experience that I went through. And recently I launched a website called Keeping It Real Caregiving. And that's a portal for information, awareness, advocacy, sharing stories, trying to give each other support. Because what I learned that is once you're within the family caregiving space, there is so much that we don't know about. And I do want to say that my mom that you see here, Miss Nellie, she made it to age 90 before she passed away. And she was a very feisty woman. So it doesn't surprise me that she made it to age 90. And she wanted to hold on till that long. And this is the website that I mentioned to you. And just to give you an idea of what the last final months of my mom's life were like for us, I want to share with you a short little video clip that was very heartfelt to me. This was my mother's 90th birthday, and one that we thought would probably be her last. So let me see if this will play. Yes.
Happy birthday, Nellie.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, having your McDonald's hamburger. Happy birthday to you and your favorite cheesecake and many more. That's my mama. Okay, make a wish. Want me to help you blow it out? Almost.
A little closer.
1, 2, 3.
There it is.
Woo! Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to share that little clip is, first of all, it's very heartfelt to me, but it was a reminder that how quickly the time passed for us of having my mom with me. And although the caregiving journey at times felt very overwhelming, it was moments like this that made me realize that you don't know how much time we have with our elders. And a few months after this, sadly, as I mentioned, angels came to collect my mother in September. And luckily, despite the COVID pandemic of last year, the care facility that my mother was in, they did allow me to be with her near the very end. And I was with her, holding her hand and stroking her face as she crossed over to the other side. And so one of the things at that moment, ironically, I was in the room with her in those final days, working on a proposal to start helping people understand what's at stake with family caregiving. And so I want to try to help others figure out some of what I didn't have guidance on at the time. And so in the chat box, if you feel like it, or just by a show of hands, I'm curious how many people here are already caregivers, just so I have an idea of what we're working with. Okay, at least one hand going up. Actually, quite a few hands. A lot of people are already caregivers. Who here is just out of curiosity wanting to kind of figure out what you may need to know about? Again, quite a few people. And anybody joining us this afternoon who says, I am not a caregiver, I'm never going to be a caregiver, and I just kind of wanted to see who was around this afternoon. That's what I thought. I asked that question because when you think about the numbers of caregivers, all of us here today, the AARP Caregiving in the US 2020 research report says that there are 43.5 million family caregivers here in the United States. So let that sink in a second. 43.5 million people. That is a lot of people here in the US. And as our population continues to age, that number is only going to climb even higher. And caregivers come in all ages. It's not just middle age and older, it can be young people now. We're seeing that more and more. It's not just women who are typically caregivers. More men are also family caregivers at this point. And another aspect of this report that many of us living this understand is that more often than not, it is family members who are doing the direct heavy lifting for caregiving. So what does that mean? It means that as family members, we have to think about what do we do to address this. Part of the reason that this strikes home for me is that if someone had mentioned this information to me in 2000, when my mother first came to live with me in South Florida, and if I had thought about the idea of caregiving, I probably would have addressed some of these issues differently sooner. In fact, at the time, if somebody said to me, are you a caregiver? I can tell you that I got very angry. I said, no, I'm not a caregiver. My mom lives near me, but I'm not a caregiver. What I didn't realize was that if I had accepted that fact sooner, I probably would have started taking steps to address what I needed to do much sooner. And so for me, that caregiving, without realizing it, meant that I actually had relocated my mother to Florida and all the work that goes with selling a house and packing a house, moving her to Florida, getting her resettled, handling all of her transportation needs, handling all of her medical needs, setting up doctors, finding insurance, finding a senior care center for her activities during the day, finding basically, all of the items that would be aspects of the final portions of her life chapter. But still, I didn't see myself as a caregiver. The other thing that I realized is that when people saw me many years working in South Florida, they always saw my mother with me, whether it was personal events, out shopping, going to galas, luncheons. Mom was always with me. And so I didn't understand that I already was a family caregiver. And so one of the things that I kept thinking about was that, you know what, I have siblings, I have brothers and sisters. At some point, they're going to swoop in here and they are going to say, listen, you've helped mom for a few months. Why don't we'll take over. You take a break now. I want to share with you that even if you have family members and siblings, this is something I call the vanishing sibling syndrome. Do not automatically assume that because you have siblings or other family members that they may be there to step in there and help you with your loved one. And this isn't any type of slam on a family relationship, because my siblings did help in the ways that they could. But if you accept the fact sooner rather than later that you are a family caregiver, you actually start to make steps differently and plan differently. And that's one of the things that I really want everybody to do, is start thinking about, are you a family caregiver? And if you are, go ahead and embrace that fact, because the sooner you think about it, the sooner you can take steps. And this is what I call the 3 Ps. This is what I discovered as I move forward in the caregiving. The 3 Ps, as I like to call them, are being practical, planning, and being prepared. Those 3 working together in conjunction can help lay the groundwork for you so that you can be an effective caregiver, not only for your family member or a loved one, but so you can take care of yourself. Because oftentimes, if we don't even realize that we're a caregiver, we just go about our business, we run ourselves into the ground, but we're not thinking about what that means. So again, if somebody had mentioned this to me 20 years ago, when I very first started taking over many of these aspects from my mom's life, I would have begun planning much sooner. So let's talk about practical. Anybody here today would describe themselves as really emotional? Are you somebody who responds to situations just by, emotion and not thinking things through? Anybody that fits that category? Okay, yeah, good. I don't see a whole lot of hands going up on that. That means we're probably a very practical group. And the reason I say practical is that I like to say that we should address our issues early, chart out a course, and then identify a chart that's your worst to best case scenario. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a loved one who lives with you and they're aging. Let's just say, for example, that you're in a 2-story house with lots of stairs. Maybe there's an upstairs bedroom off the balcony. Your loved one, you notice, starts to show signs of being forgetful. Maybe they're losing their eyesight. Maybe they're losing their hearing, or they have some sort of degenerative disease. And doctors tell you that your loved one will likely not be able to walk on their own in the future. They're going to need a walker. They're going to need a wheelchair. So I ask you, is it practical at this point to just be emotional and be angry or be sad about this diagnosis? Is that going to make the stairs in your home vanish? Probably not. Being practical means you can look at the situation and say, yes, my loved one can walk now, but what about in 6 months? What about in a year? Practical means that you start the process now of deciding, where is that loved one going to live and with whom? Will you keep their home? Will you sell the home? Practical means saying, if that loved one can no longer walk, what's the plan? What do we do at that point? So address issues early. And I say chart a course because it's just like if you're going out on a road trip. You wouldn't just go out on your own. You'd probably open up a map or pull out your GPS because you want to reach your destination. Well, it's the same thing for family caregiving. You know that eventually your loved one is not going to be able to stay in that home that has stairs. So what route do you take to get to that destination? The route may be that if you have the finances and the resources, perhaps you put in stairs, or maybe a chairlift, maybe a motorized type of situation. Do you close off that upstairs balcony or bedroom? Think about all of that, because the point is that if you wait until a crisis arises, now everybody is scrambling to try to figure out what that living arrangement is going to look like. So if we're practical, we know that this situation is coming. The doctors have told us it's on the way. So you want to approach these situations early. One of the ways I do that, and I advise others, is to make 3 lists. 1 is your best case scenario. In this case, let's say there's a 100% turnaround and your loved one has absolutely no issues and they live another 20 years. That's best case. All right, but think about middle case scenario. Maybe your loved one is able to walk, but the dementia diagnosis progresses, and so they need someone with them at all times. Worst case scenario, your loved one loses their mobility. the dementia progresses. You only have funds to have in-home care maybe a few hours a day, and there aren't any family members who can quit work to care for your loved one. There aren't enough assets to pay for high quality care at an assisted living facility, but you don't qualify for any kind of assistance. And on top of that, your doctors tell you that your loved one has a very slow decline and they could be in this state for 6 to 7 more years. Okay, that's worst case scenario. Not fun to think about, but it's a reality. So what do? You start planning early to think about what will that look like. So when you start to see these connections of how a situation, you approach it practically, and then you start making plans, the sooner you do that, the better. Planning is the next phase of that. So now you look at those situations and you say, what about 6 months, a year, 5 years, right? I found that if I worked backwards and did a lot of planning, I could sort of project out what may happen and try to be as prepared as possible. Part of that planning means that you need to research all of your options. If you have those 3 lists, you can almost look at, okay, well, what's my situation or plan for this option? What's my plan for this middle case scenario? And what's my plan for this third scenario? That gives you time also to understand what type of Medicare offerings may be available for your loved one. I'm going to assume in this case, if they're over 65, Medicare has kicked in, so they have some sort of coverage. Start to identify your local resources in the area. If your loved one is elsewhere, same thing. That may mean taking a couple of trips to where your loved one lives, but it may also think about considering, does my loved one need to be moved to live with me? Start thinking about what resources you have locally that you can tap into. And I mentioned the Medicare item. One of the reasons that I have this slide is, if you see this and I have the book with me, I think you can kind of see it. Well, not with our Zoom, but I call the Medicare booklet the Bible. And I can tell you it's not fun reading, it's not sexy reading or exciting, but this was a lifesaver for me when my mom first moved here to Northern California with me. When we were in South Florida, I still hadn't tapped into the idea of being a caregiver. Once she moved here to Northern California with me, I realized that there was so much about her healthcare that I had no idea about. The Medicare booklet is what I call the Bible. I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to review it, not only for somebody that you may be taking care of, but for yourself. Again, the more you know about what services are available, the better. And Passages does have some programs to help guide you through Medicare, and you can have questions for Kelsey about that afterwards. Also, one of the other things about being prepared, again, as I said, is research your local facilities. That includes assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care. All of those are different and each offer a different type of service, and each are covered by different types of insurance coverages. And just as a side note, for those of you who do not already know this, Medicare does not cover assisted living accommodations. Many people think, oh, my loved one will hit 65, they'll get Medicare and we'll be able to move them into a place and get care. Medicare does not cover assisted living facilities, nor does it pay for in-home care. That's private pay. So that goes back to what we talked about earlier of planning, right? And being practical. You have to look ahead. One of the other aspects about caregiving that I encourage everybody to think about early in being prepared is understand the medications that your loved one may be taking. Even if they don't live with you or they're nearby, it's a good idea to have a conversation with them and or their doctor so that you understand what their medical framework is. Understand their medications, know when they take them, know the names of them, and know exactly how those medications work together. Organize important documents, wills, power of attorney, insurance, any military papers. Make sure that you've had a conversation with your loved one about identifying and organizing as many of those documents as you possibly can. and start discussing finances. These are all things that will come into play early. Finances could be one of the things that trip people up faster than almost anything else. One thing that I didn't mention that I mentioned skilled nursing facilities or assisted living facilities. One of the aspects of being prepared, and a friend told me this years ago, is start researching these local facilities long before you may need them. Again, when we had our worst to best case scenario, even if your loved one is fine now, what might they look like in 5 years? If you're in an area that has a facility in your heart, you may not want to do that. I advise everybody to go visit those facilities. Obviously, with COVID, things have been different this past year, but I advise you to research all of your local facilities. You can find that information online. And if you have the opportunity, physically visit those facilities. Meet the administrators, introduce, start to get a relationship. I had a friend advisor, and I just kept saying to him, nope, I don't want any part of it. I'm not visiting. I don't want to know anything about them. But thank goodness he stayed on me about that. And so it turned out that here in the Chico area, I did have a relationship with one of the facilities, and I was able then, when the time came, to coordinate something for my mother. So I encourage all of you to start looking into those early so that you can research their records. You can look at the state records for any types of violations or fines. You can find the ratings for those companies. It does take a little bit of digging, but if you have that education now, it could mean the difference between, finding a safe place for your loved one or being in a crisis situation and not having any options. So again, start early, do your homework, and start researching. And also, I do want to mention that Passages has some more information also about how to go about researching those local facilities and possibly visits. So make sure that if you have questions about that, we can tackle that at the tail end. The other item that I encourage everybody to do as part of the preparation is get to know your loved one's doctors. A lot of times, if your loved one is able to still navigate on their own and they go to and from doctor's appointments, and you'll say, oh, mom or dad, how was your doctor's appointment? Oh, it was fine. Get to know the doctors. Make sure they know who you are as well. Even if your loved one doesn't want you to go with them to an appointment, it's important that they have an advocate. And the more you know about their doctors, having those doctors' names, the phone numbers, the hours that they're available, make sure that you are part of that. And then your loved one sees that. And one of the things that I like to say is that as you embrace the role of family caregiver, you become an advocate for your loved one. And one of the things that I discovered in the time of taking care of Miss Nellie was that I respect doctors. Obviously, they have MDs. I'm not a doctor. But much of her care came because I was a squeaky wheel, and I insisted that certain things be reviewed or that medications be explained to her or to me. And so at all times, you have to be your loved one's warrior. You have to be their guardian. Ask as many questions as you can think of to the doctors. Always be respectful, but ask questions. Don't just take their word for everything. Be prepared. Have a little bit of your own homework. And if I could, just a quick story, going through my slides here. When I talk about the hospitals and doctors, this really brings home that point. We had a situation where my mother, Miss Nellie, was admitted to the hospital for a bladder infection. And that caused quite a few other issues. And again, because I'm a squeaky wheel, I asked questions. I said, I'm going to stay in the room with her. I'm not leaving her by herself. And I know my mother's benchmark, meaning I know how alert she is. I know her cognitive skills. I know whether she eats or not, whether she combs her hair and how she holds herself. Well, the care team at the hospital started to see a decline in day 2. And they were insistent that her decline was based on this medical condition. And I said, no, Miss Nellie wasn't like this when we brought her in 2 days ago. She had a medical issue, but not the decline I'm seeing. It turns out that her medications had been changed because it's very common in hospitals that they will administer medications based on the doctor's rounds or the nurse's rounds, not on your loved one's medication schedule. And I share this because a lot of people who end up in a hospital situation don't realize that. My mother had Parkinson's disease. And so some of the medications she took, of course, were neurological medications. Any little change in the dosage or the time that those medications are administered can send somebody in a tailspin. And that's exactly what was happening to my mother. So it was only because I literally put up a fight with one of the doctors and demanded that they give my mother her medication at the times that she was supposed to take it, that happened. And sure enough, within 24 hours, my mother was back to her benchmark of what I knew her to be at. Now, we still had to handle the bladder infection, but the other decline had not happened. So that's an example of why I say you have to be an advocate for your loved one. That's part of being prepared. Part of being prepared is watching them, knowing what their benchmarks are, asking questions, watching out for them. Again, I love the statement of saying that you're their warrior and you are their advocate. And I have a number of other hospital stories that I won't get into today, but if you'd like to reach me after this, my information will be up at the end, and I'm happy to share some of that because a lot of information that I learned by simply being in the hospital that you can only know it once you're in it. And the final item that I want to share with you about being prepared, and again, we talked a little bit about this, is finances. Finances can get a lot of people tripped up, right? It's something that we talk about in private. It's something that we sometimes are hush-hush about, and we don't always talk about it, especially with our loved ones or our elders, mostly because I think generationally, we didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about those issues. But when it comes to the care of your elder and your loved one, it may be critical that you understand what type of finances you're dealing with. What do they have in place? And here's why, if my slide will work. All right, let's see here. There we go. So according to the financial portal Spend Me Not, 69% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings accounts. In fact, over 50% of women have no savings at all. So just let that sink in a little bit, and then think about how much it costs to have medications and doctor's visits and co-pays. On top of those numbers, statistics show that Americans are living longer. The US Census says that American life expectancy by 2060, which hard to believe is just around the corner, is 85.6. That's just the average. And on top of that, women still live longer than men. So if you take those two factors into consideration, that we don't save very much, women save even less, and women live longer than men. So all of those things combined do not make for a good prognosis for women as we age. So the whole issue of money and savings comes back to our first element of the being practical and planning and preparing. The sooner that you embrace the role that you're a caregiver or that you're looking forward, the sooner you can make some tough decisions about finances and having those conversations with your loved ones. And I know it's not easy. It was like pulling teeth with my mom to talk about money. But in my situation, my parents were retired military, and I knew that there were no other savings involved and no other investments and no other pensions. And so luckily, by the grace of God, a friend had encouraged me to purchase a long-term care insurance policy years ago. And I did that because something told me, even though I didn't think of myself as a caregiver, I thought, I'm going to be taking care of Miss Nellie. I'm sure of it. So luckily I had that long-term care policy, because otherwise there would have been no additional funds to be able to take care of Miss Nellie. And so each family is different, but it's important that you find out what your family situation is all about when it comes to money. So practical planning and prepared when it comes to finances means that you also think about, okay, so at 65 you have Medicare, but what are the next levels of insurance? We see those commercials for supplemental plans all the time. That's what they're talking about. If Medicare only covers a portion, What about the supplemental insurances, and how much of that can you afford? Not everything is still covered. So it's imperative that you know what your financial situation is. How much money do you have to work with? Are there any savings dollars? Do you have other insurance plans in place? What about retirement funds? Is your loved one a military member? Are there any other military benefits? There may be some. You may have some extra help from the VA administration, and oftentimes they won't reach out and find you and say, hey, we have this service available. Sometimes we have to go dig that out and find it ourselves. Who's the power of attorney for your family member? And power of attorney for finances and power of attorney for medical situations. Those sorts of items can be sticklers to talk about with your loved ones, but you want to make sure that you've had those conversations early and have everything in place. Again, I won't get into it now because I know we're limited with time, but I remember the day that I sat down with my mom and I said, we are going to make a will, Mom, and here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to fill this out, and we're making a will, and we're going to make sure that we have all of your paperwork in place. Not because I think you've got one foot out the door already, but because I want to be practical and have it done already. I want to plan, and when the time comes, I want to be prepared. So if you haven't done so yet, make sure that you have that conversation with your loved one. And so we talked about the idea of, you know, having siblings and group meetings and discussions about the care. And within all of this, you also have to take into consideration, what are the needs and wants of your loved one? You know, what do they want? Each family is different and family dynamics are all different. So you have to think about those things and move forward within that framework. In my situation, my siblings were okay with me taking the lead, and I had a good relationship with my mom. And so I was able to navigate all of that, but I did it early. And because I started early, I was able to have this journey a little smoother. Now, I'll be honest, there were plenty of bumps, mostly because you don't know what you don't know. And I thought I had everything planned out. I thought I had everything in place, but sure enough, items came up that I had no idea about. So again, the sooner you embrace the role that you are a caregiver, then the more you can start to take steps to figure out, how do I handle my family situation? And so these photos were years before my mom became ill. And some closing thoughts before we wrap up that I want you to think about in your role as a caregiver. So before Mom became ill, I mentioned that I had a friend who said, you've got to start thinking about all of this, Julia. And literally I was like, talk to the hand. I don't want to talk about it. Mom's fine. I don't want to deal with it. But he had taken care of his grandparents, so he saw the decline. And so he knew what was waiting for me. I encourage you to embrace this sooner rather than later, because until you're up close with it, you don't really think about what aging means and what caring for someone means. I can tell you it's more than just putting a lunch tray in front of them and making sure their favorite television show is on. It's much more than that. So you have to start planning now. Also, what about you, right? This is a good time to think about the future. I truly believe that maybe for some of our elders, we may not be able to turn the ship right now in terms of how we offer care and services and that continuum of care. I think we can only do so much now, but what about all of us, especially those of us who don't have children? What's the future going to look like for us? One of the things that as you embrace the idea of caregiving is to think about yourself, especially if you don't have children or you're not close with other family members. What do your finances look like? What about your living arrangements? What about your transportation? You have to take ownership of that for yourself, right? Because in 20, 30 years, we could be in the exact same situation. So start thinking about those things now. And I say choose wisely. And I know for some people it may sound harsh, but I want you to really think about the people that are in your life. Think about the people that are in your circle right now. And start assessing the validity of who you're spending your time and energy on. Because if you were to get into a situation where you need to turn to somebody, you need people in your life who are 100% supportive. If you're a caregiver now, that's even true, because you don't have the time or the energy to have your energy sucked up by other people. You need people who are supportive of you, who understand that at the last minute, if you say, I can't make that event, or I'm going to be late, or could you come to my house for coffee because I have to care for mom or dad or uncle or aunt. Choose wisely, because having that positive, supportive circle of people can make all the difference in terms of moving forward. And so in closing, I just want to say that I like to think that I'm a pretty positive person for the most part. I won't lie to you. After 25 years in the news, I'm a little bit jaded, but I still do believe in the positive aspects of people. But one of the things that was really hard for me about being a family caregiver was that as my mom aged and her condition declined, and Miss Nellie had Parkinson's, she had diabetes, she had heart disease, she had high blood pressure. She was never diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, but now that I'm learning more about Alzheimer's, I do think that she had some signs of dementia that were at play. So we had a lot going on in those last 5 years. And there were times when it was overwhelming. I won't lie to you. There were times when you may have seen me on air, but on the inside, I just wanted to scream. And I realized that it was a zero-sum game. And I would say to my brother, who I would talk to, I would say, this is so horrible, because there's an aspect of me that knows that the only way out of this overwhelming situation is if I lose mom. And I don't want to lose mom, right? Zero sum. And I hated that, because I like to think win-win. But within that, I did everything I could to be practical. I tried to plan. I tried to prepare. I put a lot of comedy into my time with mom, even near the end. And Miss Nellie passed away on September 1st of 2020. As I said, luckily her care facility, she didn't have a roommate, so they let me stay in the room with her. And my parents are buried at the Presidio, the National Cemetery in San Francisco. She didn't want any kind of service. She said, just put me in the ground with your dad. She was practical too. That's where I get it from. So they're both in San Francisco. And I can tell you, they have like the best spot overlooking San Francisco Bay. It's amazing. You look to the left and you see the Golden Gate Bridge. You look to the right and there's Alcatraz and the bay. And I'm like, how did they plan this for all eternity? They're in that spot. But again, each family is so different when it comes to family caregiving. There are no easy answers. I think we would be lying to ourselves if we said that. The best you can do is arm yourself with information, and knowledge, and plan ahead. Don't say, oh, it's going to go away. It's not going to go away. I like to say to people that, we think we get older, we watch a little television, and then we pass away. Well, it doesn't happen like that, because you get older and things start going haywire and you keep living. And then maybe you can't walk, but you keep living. And then maybe you can't take care of your personal needs, but you keep living. You see the pattern? And then that means somebody else is doing that care for you, but we keep living. And so you have to think long-term and think forward. And the final thing that I'll leave you with, some words of wisdom that a good friend shared with me, who is also a family caregiver. One day I was bemoaning the fact of how much work it was to care for my mother, although I love her dearly and miss her. He said, Julia, I will say to you, instead of saying I have to take care of my mother, say I get to take care of my mother. Him saying that changed everything for me. And I'm so glad he shared that with me, because in the end, I know that I did everything possible. I did the right things. I always did the right things by her. And I know that it meant everything to her near the end. And then I had no regrets about anything. And so now the goal is to try to help everybody else so that we can make it even better. So that is me wrapping up the accidental caregiver. I'll leave this slide up for a little bit so that you can contact me. And I think that we'll be able to send out some other resource links for you as well. And in fact, maybe I could put some of those into our chat. But any questions before I turn it back over to Kelsey?
Yeah, and just a reminder to everyone, so use your chat box for the questions. We have a pretty big group, so we don't have the option to unmute yourself, but you can click on that little chat button and then type your questions in the chat box. I did have one that someone sent to me personally, but I'll go ahead and ask you in kind of a more general way, Julia. But when you're talking about being practical versus being emotional, sometimes the person that we are caring for is not practical, or they have a lot of emotions. So do you have any tips for how to, prevent a person from getting that emotional, or just what tips would you give for someone who the care receiver is a more emotional person?
Well, clearly whoever sent that note was in my kitchen with me many times. So my mom was very emotional her whole life. And so part of addressing these issues was very difficult, because any conversation about health or end of life planning or what comes next, she would just get very upset and not want to talk about it. Or I won't say hysterical, but it was very difficult. And so one of the things that I found to be very helpful is that I addressed it directly. I wouldn't try to say, "Oh, you're being emotional, stop it." I would ask her, "Why is it that you feel this way? Are you afraid of something?" If she wasn't sure, I would say, "Are you fearful that maybe I'm not going to handle it properly? Or are you worried what the outcome will be?" And by asking her questions, I was able to zero in on what the concern was. For instance, and this isn't about the planning, but we went through a phase where we were having difficulty with a shower chair. And my mom has always been super meticulous. And then all of a sudden she was like, no, I want to skip my shower today. And I thought, okay, that is not quite right. Turns out that it had nothing to do with not wanting to take care of herself. She was fearful of the way the chair tilted just a little bit. Once I was able to work backwards from that, the practical part of me was, okay, I need to find a different chair, right? And that solved the issue. I hadn't realized that that's what it was, because from the outside, she looked perfectly fine. Once she explained that, then I realized it. Again, each family is different. For me, one of the things I did was I used comedy to weave it into addressing some of these issues. In the very beginning, when my mother first started to use a walker, she still lived in South Florida and had an upstairs, downstairs townhome. Looking ahead, I knew we were going to have to sell that townhome. Mom couldn't stay with stairs, but she wasn't ready to sell or make a change. And I would say to her, "Mom, we need to think about what we're going to do with your home." "I'm not moving anywhere." And I would just look at her and say, "Well, if you fall down those stairs and crack your hip, you're done, right?" I said, "And then I'm not going to be over here for a couple of days, and you're going to be laying there in the hallway, and it's just going to be really bad." And I'd laugh. And I'd say, "Do you want that?" And she'd say, "You're crazy." I'm like, "Well, I'm just trying to be honest with you, Mom." And then we would laugh, but then she would think about it and we would address the situation. So I think if one person in your family is very emotional, figure out what their dynamic is of how they communicate, ask questions, work backwards to get to what is driving maybe that resistance of you being practical. And I hope that helps.
Yeah. And we've got another question coming in. So what are the top 3 things you would suggest to do first? A list of doctors, finances, etc.
In terms of preparing, definitely all of the doctors, their phone numbers, and make copies of those or put it into your phone or whatever mobile device you have. List of all the medications as well. And this is key, list of medications, because many of you know it. If you go to the doctors, the first thing they ask you is, "Oh, any change in your medications?" And if you're on a lot of medications, you go, "Oh my God, I don't know. I'm taking X, Y, and Z." Now, if it's your person that you're caring for, how in the world are you going to keep up with most of that? So what I did is I made a list of all of the medications, the names, their generic name, their medical name, the milligrams, what day and time, the times a day Mom was supposed to take them. And I made a chart so that I knew exactly what was what. I sent those copies to myself via email so that I had them in my phone. I had them in my iPad. I sent copies to all of my siblings. That way, whenever a doctor asked, I could refer back to that list. And I also kept hard copies with me just in case I couldn't get internet reception. Medication is key, to know all of that. And then also, I would say, start identifying who your support system is. Don't think that you have to do this all alone. And I didn't mention that earlier, but I wanted to, is that at times you think, oh my God, I'm the only one, I'm all by myself. You're not. And sometimes when you express to people that this is what's happening in your life, you'll be surprised at who will step forward to offer care. And don't think that you have to put on your cape and be super person. If somebody says, hey, I can make a dish of food, accept it, because simply one meal that you don't have to fix can make the difference of you maybe having a little bit more time. So think about who is in your circle that you could turn to if you had an emergency. I would say those three things.
And I'll add to that, so I'll talk a little bit more after we get through some more of these questions about passages. But I know some of just your important documents is something that we recommend. And so passages, we can help you with any of that too, but like power of attorney, advanced healthcare directive, some of those are also helpful. The will, I know Julia mentioned. So we have some different classes on getting your important documents in order for you and your loved ones. So those are some other things that we can help with, and I'll go over more about passages at the end, but we have a couple more questions coming in. First, does passages offer caregiver training? So we do offer a lot of different caregiver trainings. You're asking specifically about first aid. So we have done a non-medical caregiver training class. So we're not going to teach you how to be a nurse or some of those more medical techniques and things, but we can help with, we've had like physical therapists come show how do you properly transfer a person so that you're safe and they're safe. So we do offer a lot of different classes like that. We also have a lot of resources for even DVDs you can check out from us, or nowadays there's so many links online that we can help share with you some resources or shorter videos on more specific things. So Mary or anyone else on here with those same kinds of questions, again, that's something that passages can help you with, and we'll work with you on that. Julia, a question for you. So what did you do to manage the rough times and or care for yourself if that was possible? And I'll add on to this too. I know you worked full time. So do you have tips for people on when you do have to work full time and be a caregiver? How do you manage that? What are some tips for people?
You guys know I have a sense of humor. I drank. Not really. I didn't. But that just made me laugh thinking about that. No. Really, it's different for everybody. One of the things I did was that, as I mentioned, my siblings pretty much let me handle things, but it was my brother who was my sounding board, and he's not local. And so he didn't have solutions for me, but he would let me just vent. So at least once a month I would call and I would say, hey, how you doing? I'm just calling to vent. And I would start the conversation that way, and he would just let me get it all off my chest. That was one thing I did. I've always worked out. And so that was really key for me, that I realized I still needed to make sure that I found time to do my exercising. When that went by the wayside, that's when things really started spiraling down for me. And so if you have anything that you do for yourself, even if it's 10 minutes a day, you need to keep doing that. And then my other secret tool, I would, if I put mom down for a nap after she had a meal, I knew, just like a baby, I knew her sleep patterns. So in that window of time, I would say, okay, I'm going to go get a really long shower and just be able to kind of go into my own little world, because I knew she was napping, and then I knew it would be okay. And so, and I was honest with myself. There were some times that I was angry or I felt very put upon. And then I would say, but it's nobody's fault, and then I would remind myself that one day it's all going to be over. And so that kind of always pulled me back to center. And again, it's different for everybody. And comedy, like I said, comedy has always been my go-to for my sanity. And Kelsey, you mentioned, and for those of you who don't know, I was working full time during all of this. So I would, my work schedule, I was on air from 5 to 7. So my time to get up was at 12:30, 12:45 a.m. So I would get up in the morning, and when mom was still living with me, I would get up, get her up so I could take her to the bathroom, make sure that if she needed anything, then put her back to bed, go to work. There was a 2-hour gap before the caregiver arrived at the house that I was stressed on air every morning thinking the phone's going to ring. And then luckily my employer worked with me during the heavy lifting of it. And so I was able to go back home, get breakfast, make sure she was okay. And then the other caregivers would be there. And so it was just, it's a juggling act and playing games with yourself mentally to say, one day I'm not going to have my person. So whatever is happening right now, I'm going to just breathe and get through it. But it wasn't easy. Definitely wasn't easy. And I have a very supportive partner who was very understanding through all of this. So I was lucky in that way.
We'll ask one more question, I think. And then if we have time after I go over some of the passages, services, and if you want to stay on for a few more minutes at the end, we can shoot some more questions to you, but I'll have you end on this one. Someone asked, what if your circle of friends are no more? So you talked about meeting your friends. So what if they aren't there anymore? What would you suggest?
That's a great question. And in a weird way, I feel like that was the case for me because I've only been in Chico for 5 years and I moved here sight unseen and didn't know a soul. So I have friends at work, but my core friends are all in South Florida and on the East Coast, right? And so one of the things that I realized I had to do was I established even stronger relationships with my neighbors. And we've always been close with our neighbors, but that became even more so because I knew that there may be times that I had to reach out to them. And so I had to sort of dig within myself and put aside that I can do it myself attitude and say, okay, I have to have somebody that I trust, that I believe in, and that I believe they will be there for me. And that's hard sometimes because you don't want to ask people and you don't want to feel vulnerable. But there's a point when you have to trust that other people will be there for you. And so if that means creating a new circle, and you don't have a lot of time, but even if it's one person that you feel you can confide in and say, hey, listen, I just need you to maybe go to the grocery store for me once a week, even just that little bit. And the more you talk to people about your situation, again, I believe you'll be surprised at how many people are also willing to help, or they just don't know. They don't know you're in this situation. And if you let them know, they're more than willing to assist in some way. They just don't know how. So you have to tell them.
Well, you've offered so many good tips today, and I'm sure everyone has enjoyed just hearing from you and getting to know you a little bit better. And again, so Julia's got her website, keepingitrealcaregiving.com, and you can email her or reach out to her. We will also make sure we email everyone all of these links from today. So don't feel like you have to write it down or copy it. We will email that to everyone. And just real quick, I'm going to pop up my screen from just so you can see a little bit more about passages and some of the services that we have available to you. So if you're not familiar with us, passages we serve, we call them informal family caregivers. So as Julia is explaining her story, we would call her an informal family caregiver. So she's not a paid caregiver working for someone. She's just taking care of a loved one. It can be a family member, it can be a close friend or a neighbor, but you're just helping to care for someone who is at least 60 years old or older, or an adult that's over the age of 18 and the condition happened after the age of 18. So maybe they had a stroke, maybe they've had a brain injury and they need some help from you. So those informal caregivers. Some of the services that we provide, and there's no cost for services. Most of the services are free. Every now and then there might be a slight copay, which we would always go over with you ahead of time. But we're here just to support family caregivers and make sure that you are staying healthy physically, emotionally, mentally. So we give whatever support we can. So there is an online program that's called Care Navigator. So Care Nav. If you prefer doing things online instead of picking up the phone and calling us, you can even sign up to talk with a family consultant through that Care Nav online. You can also call us. So we call them family consultations. So you're just able to talk to one of our staff who is experienced and trained in supporting family caregivers. Most of us have all been family caregivers or currently are family caregivers. So we can share some tips with you or just help you, even as Julia talks about how do you be prepared for those next stages. We can help you get things in order and give you some different little tips and even worksheets to work out, like how do we keep track of medications. So we have a lot of different resources to help with that. If your loved one has a diagnosis that you're not very familiar with, or the doctor didn't really explain things, or you just want more information about that, we can pull up information, we can mail it to you, we can talk with you over the phone about their diagnosis. We have respite services. So if you can't find neighbors or friends or anyone who can kind of give you a break, or you need to go out and run your errands, or come to a support group or an in-person training, when we can do those again. We can, depending on funding, provide respite for you. So we would pay to have a worker come in and sit with your loved one or help them out while you get a break. We've got trainings, classes like this. We can help with short-term counseling. So if you think you could benefit from doing some short-term counseling related to your caregiving, we offer that. Also the legal side of things. So if you're trying to figure out kind of just that planning for the long run and figuring out a will or a trust, or you just have some legal questions, we can help set you up with that. And then there's a few other supplemental services or assistive devices, anything that can help support you as a caregiver. We usually can figure something out to support you in that way. Again, most services are free. So for complete access to all of the services, you do have to call us or go online and actually register as a member of our program. But we're just here to support you. And even if you just have a few questions, or you just want a little bit more information, or anything that we went over today that you thought, oh, it'd be helpful to learn more, feel free to give us a call. We've got the phone number up on this screen, so 530-898-5925. You can email us, you can visit us online at passagescenter.org. And again, I will email all the links and all the information to everybody from today. So you will have that probably by the end of the day in an email. And then we will also, once the recording of today is uploaded, we will send you the link for that. So usually it takes within a week, we will have that emailed out to everyone. And there'll also be an option just to give us some feedback. Let us know if it was helpful, or what you liked best about today, or what you would like to learn more about. So we do have classes, like one of the participants asked about the emotional side of things. So we have specific classes on how do you manage emotions in yourself, or how do you learn from the emotions of your loved one. So we have a lot of different classes. We have some on how to know when is it time to place a loved one, or just how do I learn more about that side of things if I just want to be more informed of what are the options out there. So again, you visit us online or give us a call and learn what the resources are, because it really does help. Like Julia is saying, being prepared is not just about having everything organized. It really does relieve that stress of, if you're not prepared and the next phases start happening, it just adds a lot more stress. So the more you can be prepared and understand what you might expect, it will really help you not have that stress overload the same. So again, Julia, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. I know I really did. And we've got some people in the chat box just kind of saying thanks. So if anyone does want to hang around for a minute or ask a couple more questions, we can do that. But otherwise, you can email us, you can call us. We're so glad all of you were able to join us today. And we're so grateful that all of you, if you are caregivers, that you've chosen to do that and be able to give back to your loved one. So I'll hang out on here for a minute. So if anyone has questions for us, feel free to chat. So I'll keep the screen up for a minute, but otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you at our next one.